From being known as the man who could fight the devil on 6 weeks' notice, to bringing in his 2 sons to train for his daily dose of fight motivation, here's why fighters are scared of Gilbert Burns. And let me just say, in a world where fighters are ducking each other left, right, and center, Gilbert Burns will fight the devil himself. Joe Rogan on his podcast summed up the Brazilian in a nutshell. Through all the excuses fighters may use to get out of a bout, Gilbert Burns will go, "Porra, where's the devil?" Seriously, the dude will take on just about anyone. Burns went candid in an interview where he mentioned how he has proven over and over again how he is that guy. After losing to someone as good as Kamaru Usman, ideally, a fighter would take a detour to fight someone less challenging. Not on Dorino's watch. He went straight for Wonder Boy's Stephen Thompson, who he beat via decision. But the biggest example of his courage as a fighter was when he went toe-to-toe with a man who got ducked on 4 occasions. Even Dana White admitted he doesn't blame fighters for not signing the dotted line. But where everyone was staying away from the boars on the prowl, Dorino went, "Come at me." Through all the trash talk and accent impressions, Burns backed the bark up with bite, giving Khamzat Chimaev the toughest fight of his career. The match was an all-out war, and most experts say the decision should have been given in Burns' favor. But besides taking on the scariest fighter in the UFC, Burns doesn't back down from taking a fight on short notice. Now that is the confidence of a man who knows what he's doing. And Gilbert Burns is leagues ahead of any other fighter when it comes to his jiu-jitsu. American combat sports analyst Luke Thomas broke down Burns' brilliance on the mat, speaking to Joe Rogan on his podcast. He reminisced about UFC's Quartet Ultra Grappling Tournament, where we got to see the likes of Anthony Smith, Rumble Johnson, and Sugar Sean O'Malley taking on the best MMA fighters in an all-out grapple fest. All of these names were pretty good, but when Gilbert went down there, he was on another level. His technique was of someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes elite BJJ. From the get-go, Burns had a passion to learn the martial art from a very early age, and boy, did Burns not let it all go to waste. His father had noticed this desire in little Dorino, and had offered to fix a customer's car in exchange for 3 months' worth of jiu-jitsu classes for his sons. After winning the silver medal in the World Jiu-Jitsu Championship, he beat the Thanos of Jiu-Jitsu, Celso Vinicius, at the World Pro Cup Trials in 2010, only to go on and win the World Cup Finals in Abu Dhabi. And Burns had also won the biggest Brazilian competition in Jiu-Jitsu, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Mundial, so you can say he's kind of a big deal. He even challenged Nate Diaz, another avid pupil of the art of Jiu-Jitsu, to a grappling match, after the Stockton gangster boasted of cleaning up Poirier, Conor, and Gaethje in the martial art. Funny how Burns wasn't on that list. Yeah, that match never happened. Don't blame you, Nate. But the only thing scarier than Gilbert Burns' BJJ talents is his insane training routine. Well, if you're going to take on the devil, you gotta make sure you're prepared for hell. MMA Junkie gave us a tour of the type of pressure Burns puts himself through. In the video titled 15 Minutes of Hell, we are first greeted by Rio Santana, the general manager of the Institute of Human Performance. This is the man designated to make sure Burns is both physically and mentally exhausted by the end of the workout. After each round of the circuit, Burns has to hop on the Versa Climber, which can break the average man in seconds. And the workout itself? Yeah, grab a towel for this one. We're talking 3 sets of 60-rep push-ups, rigorous shadow boxing, and shuffles progressively getting harder. The agenda is to break Dorino down in training so much that the actual fight feels like nothing less than a fun time. I don't blame Burns for pulling his shirt up at the journalists who asked him what he thinks of Masvidal being in phenomenal shape before their clash. This right here is the real deal. It's not just his technique that gives him the edge compared to other fighters. Gilbert Burns is probably the most athletic fighter you will see. The man is built like a tank and can easily take on fighters well above his weight class with ease. But what's so fascinating about Burns is that even though the grappling game may be his trump card, the man has some explosive striking. Let's roll back to Burns' thunder down on Tyron Woodley with those hammer fists in the match at UFC Fight Night. This match really showcased how good Burns can be in an all-out strike fest. And if a busted-up Tyron Woodley isn't enough evidence of Gilbert's striking prowess, how about his nasty overhand right against Jason Sago? The Brazilian didn't even need to go on the ground and pound to finish off Sago, as his head bounced off the canvas. Another iconic moment was in his match against Khamzat Chimaev, was when a battered and bruised Boris returned to his corner to reassess. Coach Andreas Michael had just one piece of advice for the Chechen brawler: don't brawl with him. Let me remind you, this is a man who has coached Swedish legend Alexander Gustafsson alongside several amazing fighters, so you know he recognizes serious power when he sees it. Even though Khamzat may have held his own on the grapple, Gilbert's striking was just too good, and everyone remembers Gilbert's explosive right hand that took the Chechen down in the dying moments of the second round. Some may call it the closest Chimaev has come to having his undefeated streak broken. And like I said, this isn't even where Burns excels. His submissions are downright terrifying. You might feel all gangster and try to hold your own against Gilbert in a fistfight, but once you're on the mat with him, the clock begins to tick backward. Alex Oliveira would agree. At UFC Fight Night, Burns had his fellow Brazilian right where he wanted him. Once the Rhino was seen looking for Oliveira's arm, everyone knew it was Pora time. Alex tried to hold on for dear life and keep his arm tucked away from the Rhino's clasp, and he almost succeeded. But this is where the Rhino proved just why he's one of the GOATs in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Burns masterfully shifted his weight and managed to secure a vicious armbar that had left Oliveira with no choice but to plea out of the submission. And if you think that was scary, how about Burns mounting Mike Davis looking for that chokehold? Once his forearms were under Beast Boy's chin, it was game over. This is where Gilbert's crazy cardio comes into play. Where most fighters would go on the wrestle, expecting their opponent to gas out, you can't do that against Burns, because he'll keep coming right back until you're the one going into deep waters. It's almost as if you're stepping into his octagon. Burns gave his fans some behind the scenes on what went into his impressive first-round submission against Neil Magny. Moreno said that it was his wife who told him not to get hit in the fight, and he stayed true to his word. Magny failed to land a single significant strike on the welterweight that night. As you can see, Burns is a family man, and that right there is also one of the many reasons why he's so dangerous. Where most fighters would often spend their nights out partying and meeting up with the yes men after training, Burns heads home to his wife, Bruna. His children and brother, Herbert, are waiting for him. He describes Bruna to be his #1 support. No kidding, she is the head coach for the Rhino. She tells him when to slow things down and to recover. She takes care of everything down to Gilbert's correspondence, so the only thing he has to worry about is fighting. A little context on Bruna. She herself is a 4-time Brazilian national jiu-jitsu champion, and you thought Burns was the real deal. She knows exactly what it takes to help her husband be the best fighter he can possibly be. As for the strategizing, Herbert takes the wheel. Brother Burns follows Gilbert wherever he goes, from sparring to helping him polish his grapple game. He helps keep that Hulk mentality in check and reminds Burns when to cool off. And even Pedro and Joshua have a role to play in their father's fight preparations. Rio Santana expressed how the IHP urges fighters to be clear about what motivates them. And to do just that, he brings in his 2 little afros for that extra boost in training. Because at the end of the day, it's the family he fights for. Vin Diesel is proud. So from bringing in his 2 sons to training for his daily dose of fight motivation, to be known as the man who will fight the devil on 6 weeks' notice, that's everything on why fighters are scared of Gilbert Burns.